Welcome to Learning Through Technology, a K-12 EdTech podcast proudly presented by STS Education. I'm Alex Inman, founder of Educational Collaborators.
And I'm Bob Cireddu, founder of the EdTech Group. We're here to bring educators together, helping them unlock the full potential of learning through technology.
Tune in every other week as we connect with education leaders and dive deep into topics that matter to you, delivering actionable ideas straight to your school. Welcome to the show.
Alex, here I am again, talking first. That's because you lost the bet. Actually, you lose all the bets, so I get to talk first because you lost the bet. Anybody who knows us knows that if I'm talking first, I lost the bet. Today, we're going to have Lane Young back with us. So Lane joined us for our Cybersecurity Month and was very insightful with cybersecurity. And at the same time, we uncovered that he is in charge of operations, strategic operations to be specific. And we thought that that was a unique and well-placed person to speak to about physical security and what we can do for our students, our staff, and our community to make sure everybody gets home safely.
Well, and physical security has become a bigger topic for all schools. And we felt like oftentimes the people who are in charge of sort of the physical security, oftentimes facilities, and not necessarily technology. And those, when operating in silos, the only people who lose are the school and the school community. And so we really wanted to have Lane back to kind of talk about his role and how physical security and technology really tie together. And though we've already done one episode on that was a little more about the stuff, we wanted to get a little more into the process. So hopefully Lane is the guy to give us that.
I think he is.
Well, let's get into this. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have another spectacular episode of Learning Through Technology, a K-12 podcast. We have again joining us Lane Young, who is the Director of Strategic Operations and Technology at Phillips Brooks School. He joined us in October to talk on one of our cybersecurity episodes, and we were so enamored with his title with Strategic Operations and Technology, we wanted to have Lane back to talk to us kind of about that marriage of strategic operations and technology. So Lane, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much. Really excited to continue talking with the two of you.
So some of our listeners may not have listened to your great episode from our Cybersecurity Month, which you should go back and find and go listen to. But for those who didn't get to meet you during that time, tell us a little bit about yourself and also kind of that journey towards that role of strategic operations and technology.
Yeah, so I have been doing various forms of EdTech now for, honing in on 20 years, which I backed in through work with libraries. So I'd done a lot of library work and then did a library EdTech, and now am focused in on EdTech. And when I got to Phillips Brooks, our safety and security was lacking. And so at the time, our then communications director and I basically decided we need to do this better. And so the two of us declared ourselves the Safety and Security Committee and invited the school nurse to join us. And now suddenly we had a Safety and Security Committee. So that's the joys of small schools where you can just kind of declare yourself a committee. So that's really how I got into the work, and then have kind of started getting more formal training and understandings of that. And my scope has evolved from that more informal role of being on this committee that was kind of ad hoc together to now it being a genuine part of my job as I examine our practices and really try and make sure that we're keeping everyone at our school safe and secure in all the meanings of those words.
So, Lane, it is a unique position, as Alex mentioned, that you've got both of those. And I've been hearing it a little more. You're not the only person that I've met with a role in operations and in technology, but 15 years ago, we didn't hear that as a dual role. 10 years ago, even maybe 5 years, and we don't hear it much now. Now, here's where I go off script again, because I've got this question right in front of me that I want to ask you, but I have a different one that I want to ask first. And so I'm going to ask that one, and then Alex and Sophia can make fun of me later for not following directions, much like most of my academic career. In your history, did you do work that prepared you for that strategic operations? And I think strategic is the important word in there, in that strategic operations, or is this new to you at Phillips Brooks?
So there's a number of pieces that are in the strategic operations, right? And so some of the strategic piece came from the strategic plan that we had done shortly before the creation of my role. And so one of the things is whenever you do a strategic plan is, okay, you have this document that you spend a lot of time on, and it's supposed to guide you for 5 to 8 years. How do you make sure that then it actually gets carried through? And so a big part of my role as it was re-envisioned was having capacity and time to really make sure that parts of the strategic plan that we had identified didn't fall through. And so safety and security was part of it. And so I had a background there. I certainly had a background on some of the curriculum pieces because of the ed tech work that I've done and the pieces here. And then I had also been a part of our diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging efforts. And that was a major part of the strategic plan. So I was kind of uniquely situated that I had been doing some work on a number of pieces of that. And so there, but I wouldn't say that before I came to PBS, I had nothing around safety and security. And it's been an interesting ride learning that and kind of doing some more formal trainings, a lot of which are through our county, which I think is really a national leader in a lot of this areas in schools. And so it's been an unexpected but exciting journey.
So funny, that makes you a trailblazer twice. 20 years ago, none of us knew how to be technology directors for schools. So we had to figure that out. And now you're taking the ride again in physical security. So overseeing technology and operations, I'm sure that there are other departments that aren't yours under your purview, I guess, that you interact regularly in preparing a security plan or anything related to security. What are those departments and how does that work for you with those departments?
I mean, I think the two kind of departments that I work with the most closely are our health department and all of those pieces, because that's one element of safety and security. And they're kind of seeing some impacts of that. And then they're also kind of on the front lines of talking to a lot of our parents. There's kind of that trust that builds up in the health realm that our parents often feel comfortable giving feedback that they may not feel as comfortable giving feedback to in others. And I would say the other department that is a crucial partner for me is our facilities teams, because we do not have dedicated security personnel at our school at this time, more by choice than anything else, fortunately. So our facilities people are often the people that are kind of doing some of the legwork. So, for instance, this year we had been finding that there were kind of things on our campus that were inappropriate for students because we have to be a public park after school hours, as many schools are. And the users of the public park were not always leaving behind what we would want students to find. And so our facilities team starting to do a sweep every morning to kind of provide those pieces are crucial partners for me in the work that I'm doing. So I think really wanted to highlight those two teams and the way that we overlap.
So help me understand a little bit more about like who your team is. So as in your director role, what groups sort of report to you? Let's just start there. What groups report to you?
So the only people that are full-time people here on campus that report to me are within my technology role. And then I have kind of dotted lines to a couple of other people, including, as I was talking about, our health office there. And then we also have kind of outside partnerships on a number of those pieces. So, I'm managing those vendor relationships. And so we might be doing those through some third party work. And so I am managing those relationships, even though they don't necessarily have someone on campus or as part of our dedicated school staff all the time. And then just by virtue of my title and position, even people that are not necessarily reporting to me, like understand that this is part of my job and do the work that way. But that obviously is a different sort of work when you're talking to someone that reports to you and is ultimately responsible to you in some way, whether it's that vendor relationship or that employee relationship versus someone who you're kind of treading on relationships as much as anything.
I've started to see in more and more schools and districts where technology and facilities actually kind of come together under the operations, whether it be a direct line or in some cases like a dotted line, like you suggested, and or like it is at your school. And I think part of the reason is I think the genesis of your committee in the first place, in that there are a lot of these systems, technology systems that the facilities team may not really be very comfortable with. They're great with electrical systems, mechanical systems, but as soon as you start getting into digital systems, IP is driving so many more of these systems, it gets out of their control. And I'm finding that when facilities and operations and technology all start to become one department, that it's usually either the former director of facilities or the former director of technology who sort of rides up. That sounds similar to your story.
Sort of. I will say, so the both facilities and I report up to the same person. So that certainly helps facilitate some of those pieces. When we were formulating my role, we did discuss briefly, does it make sense to kind of formalize other people? And we felt that there was enough kind of going on what we were doing technologically at our school at this time. And then some of the other pieces that were in my job scope that kind of adding those layers of responsibilities didn't make sense at that time. And haven't made sense for us yet, but I definitely am aware of some peers who have those facilities who exactly what you're talking about are rose up and are former technology directors who now are managing both the facilities teams and technology. And I think there's a lot of synergy there for exactly the reasons you said. There's a lot of synergy just from these are two teams that really need to be living the customer service life in a way that is different than many of our other departments at a school. And so just having those mindsets and those systems and processes for delivering results to our stakeholders for their needs is very similar, I think.
Okay, so big surprise to Bob. I'm going to dominate the questions and conversations here for a second. So, another more of a dichotomy than a collaboration, but we're going to get back to the collaboration in just a second. And you know how important collaboration is to the guy who named his company with that. But the other dichotomy that I see in a lot of technology departments is that they're oftentimes led by either somebody who's more of an academic technology leader or somebody who's more of a sort of hard IT leader. And though this is not a hard and fast rule, more often than not, the technology leader who came from more of the academic side will report to the head of school. And the technology leader who has more of the hard IT experience will report usually to the CFO who's managed or operations if there's a chief operations manager. And sometimes when I see more of that operations facility IT side, they're a little more distant from the academic side. But I know that you have experience coming from the academic side. So, what role does academic technology play in all of this? And does your movement to handle more of operations to increase your relationship with the academic program or further distance you from the academic program?
Yeah. So, Alex, I think you're right that I did kind of come up through the academic technology side of things, and people do generally come up through one side of that or the other. And so that is where my formal training is. And I will say that I think I have some responsibilities that maintain on the academic side. So, for instance, I serve as part of our academic leadership team. So I am certainly involved in that way. But moving into this role, it has been a challenge to stay as connected to our faculty, which I think has been one of my strengths as a technology leader, is that I do have that background and am seen as an educator by our faculty, right? So that kind of helps me do that side of things. But it has been a challenge to stay as connected on there. So that has been, I think, a challenge that I've had in moving into this revised role.
Blaine, I want to go back to you talking about the different departments that you work with. So it sounded like while you don't oversee all of them, of course, you do share a common supervisor or somebody that you directly report to. So you're at worst cousins. But in working with those departments, what are some of the more common friction points that you have with those departments? Things that give them a little headache or whatever in trying to succeed in your role in securing the campus?
We're a small school, so I think we try and avoid causing too much friction for each other. I think the biggest place that we've had friction, and this is going to make a mountain out of a molehill, but I will, in my role, be bringing in some vendors, and they're like, I have these other vendor relationships, and so there's questions of why certain work is being done through vendors that I'm bringing in versus vendors that they have had relationships with. And the answer is just because I'm ultimately responsible for delivering on those project, and it's within my control and to bring in these people. So I'm going to bring them in so that I'm ultimately responsible for it. And then I can ensure that they're executing what we needed to do. But I think that part has been really useful. But I think I'm pretty fortunate that I really think of myself as in the relationship business. And so really trying to, I think with facilities, especially, each of us have a deep appreciation for what the others are doing and try and do things to make each other's lives easy. So facilities is, for instance, has been on an island with their kind of ticketing system. And in general, I had been trying to consolidate systems, and I believe in fewer systems more deeply used. But they're an example of where I've kind of let them be on an island in the system that's not as plugged in or connected as we generally have, just because I appreciate the work and appreciate the comfort and want them to be successful. And so if they're telling me that they're going to be successful using that, I want to be supportive in that way.
So your answer to Bob's question was great in terms of helping me understand kind of how your tech role is sort of serving across those areas. How are you interfacing and building relationships with these various groups on the operations side that really are different than some of the technology ways that you used to interface with?
I think a lot of it is the same. So a lot of it is I'm listening to what people need for technology. Now instead I'm listening, what do people feel like they need in order to be safe and secure? So I always want to kind of start with listening. It's ironic on a podcast where I'm doing a lot of talking that I talk about the importance of listening, but I really do believe it.
That's all right. That's how I host these things.
You found a kindred spirit in Alex where he talks and considers it listening.
Yeah. No, I do genuinely try and listen. But so a lot of it is listening. And then it's about sharing, change management is change management. So as we're talking about all of this, I think the skills that I have through technology are the same skills that I've had to deploy as we've tried to improve it. And in some ways, it's actually easier with safety and security because people really do no one's like, no, I don't want to have safety at my school. Like the vision for what that is might be different, but that is different than, no, I don't think I need technology to be a successful teacher. Even in 2024, I find that there are still educators that are coming with some version of that mindset, but no one is saying, no, I don't want to feel safe at my school. So in some ways, that's a really great leverage point. So as I'm trying to do stuff and trying to introduce new things, if I introduce a new system and I'm saying, here are the ways that we think this is going to make us more safe, there's a willingness to try it. And that doesn't always mean that people ultimately go there. But I do find that there's a willingness to try if I explain the how and why of the safety piece that is different than the technology side.
So, Lane, can you maybe dig in and give us a specific example of that?
So as an example of that, I think we have really placed an emphasis. We have a more porous campus than we would ideally like. There's more ways to kind of get onto our campus than ideally we would like. And we're looking at ways of changing that. But as I mentioned earlier, we have to still maintain our ability to be a public park. And so there's kind of limits to how much we can to funnel people in certain ways. And so we've had a major focus on making sure that everyone that's on campus during the day is badged in an appropriate way this year. And that has involved work from everyone that we're like, we need everyone. If you see someone, even if they're a parent, we need everyone to kind of be willing to have that slightly uncomfortable conversation with this person you don't know in whatever way, even if you think they're a parent, and say, hey, I notice you don't have a badge. You just can go pick that up at the Welcome Center. It's really important that everyone does this for the safety of our children, and kind of giving them that language, but also asking people to take that slightly uncomfortable step. And I think we've had some success with that in a way that when we ask people to take some slightly uncomfortable steps, maybe with technology or take that risk, that it's kind of harder to get them to take that little bit of risk or do that little bit of discomfort.
Hey, we don't mean to interrupt, but we're going to take a little break here to deliver this brief message.
Are you ready to revolutionize your classroom? Join us at FETC 2025, the premier conference for education technology, from January 14 to 17 at the Orange County Convention Center in Orlando, Florida. Connect with thousands of educators, discover innovative tools, and gain insights to enhance your teaching. Register by January 13th to take advantage of our standard pricing and use promo code TechLearn2025 for an additional 10% off. Visit fetc.org to register now.
ViewSonic is your go-to technology partner for engaging students, fostering collaboration, and elevating learning outcomes. Offering a broad array of future-ready audiovisual solutions, training, and tools that adapt to your school's changing needs. ViewSonic is more than a brand. It's your educational edge. Explore the possibilities today at viewsonic.com/edu.
Imagine a future where students can access tools that spark learning, growth, and creativity. At Lenovo, our K-12 solutions are designed to create a world where EdTech tools are safe and secure, engaging and easy to use, and built for productivity wherever learning takes place. We partner with customers and value lasting relationships. We work closely with you to assess your needs, evaluate options, and customize solutions. We understand the dynamics and trends shaping K-12 today and tomorrow and how they affect your specific situation. We can help you plan wisely to deploy and scale solutions that will deliver the best student and teacher experiences and improve learning outcomes. We do this all while implementing the right education technology for your use case and budget. Visit us at the link in the show notes below.
Hey there, it's Sophia, executive producer for the show. You know those moments when the episode ends and you're thinking, man, I wish we could talk more about this. Well, guess what? We can. We got this amazing community over on LinkedIn. It's where we share all the good stuff, sneak peeks, cool resources, and quick activities to try out in your school. So here's what I want you to do. Grab your phone, head to LinkedIn, and search for our Learning Through Technology podcast page. Hit that follow button, and boom, you're in. Can't wait to see you there.
Lane, now I know why we had you back. Every time you talk, it makes me think of something else to ask about. And there were two things there, and I'll lose them if I don't get them out there. But one of them is you spoke about your school being a bit more porous than you'd like. And I think that probably speaks to every school across the country. But then we also have this, we don't want students going to school in prisons. That's the exact opposite, especially the work I know that we've done together at Phillips Brooks. That's the exact opposite of even more so than other schools. So just like we talked about in cybersecurity, you have that balance. So I don't want you to really tell us about where your weaknesses are, of course, but I do want you to talk a bit about, you had also said, this goes together, you had said you're porous, but you also said are more porous than you'd like. But you also said, nobody says we don't want to secure our kids, but there's not an unlimited amount of funds and it doesn't matter where you are, public school, independent school, parochial, whatever. So where do you start? I don't want you necessarily to tell us what you've done unless you'd like to, but where do you start in this is what I have for funding? This is how much our community is willing to take inconvenience and going against our open culture to secure our students. So that's a really tough conversation to have. And I think that's where you're uniquely qualified to tell us how to lead that as technology directors or operations.
So I think, one, it's a lot of incremental pieces. And I think there is far more opportunity to do a series of incremental changes around safety and security that people can appreciate and not feel overwhelmed by, rather than I found with technology that if you're constantly rolling out new technology initiatives, people are like, whoa, hold on there. But again, the mindset does seem to be different around safety and security. And so we are able to kind of just say, okay, good job us on this last piece. And now we're ready for this next piece because there is this vision of what we want. And we're hopefully going to get there. I do think something on the kind of funding aspect that you get at is that I have found that I have to be more flexible with funding around safety and security. And let me give you an example of that. We had been planning to do some work around trying to remedy some of the porous campus pieces that I was talking about. But we have a tremendous amount of outside space here in California. We have like one hallway in the entire school. So all of our hallways are outside, essentially, right? We're going outside. And we have a number of eucalyptus trees on campus, and the eucalyptus trees branches were falling and creating hazards for people. We hadn't had anyone hit by a falling branch, but it was just a matter of time. And so funding that we had for other safety and security routes needed to be reallocated to taking care of our eucalyptus tree problem, because that was our biggest threat for safety and security at the moment. And so that is continuing to be a major investment that we're making around trees that we had not planned on making in 2024. So that ability to pivot, I find, is far more common in this role than it is with technology, where I am, through kind of good process, able to say, I'm spending more money on AI than I predicted 3 years ago, but I'm not spending more money on AI this year than I thought I was going to spend at the start of this year. And so that ability is something different here.
Lane, you remind me that we talk to people across the country, but we have our local perceived notions of what schools are. When I was a kid, pop culture reference for Sophia, we'd watch TV shows or movies of students going out to their lockers outside. Well, here in Northeast Ohio, where I'm not kidding, there's 3 feet of snow outside of my window. That wasn't a real thing to us, but you're securing students who literally go outside. And as we've worked more with EdTech and schools in California, that's the real deal. Like, kids are not behind locked doors during classes. And that was a comment that I need to make, because I picture a school as a all enclosed. But yes, many of the schools that we work with in California are not at all. And I'm jealous.
I mean, I came here from the Midwest, and so I appreciate the culture you're talking about, and it's something that I try and continue to appreciate. That is a joy of being here in California.
But it's a different kind of challenge. So it's valuable, but it's a different kind of challenge. So I want to dig a little bit more into what you were saying about the priorities changing. Like, you had your plans, but you had to look at trees. Is it because our notion of safety and security is still kind of immature and evolving? Or is it because the priorities change that rapidly? And how and why is that actually different than your traditional technology?
Yeah, I think with technology, there are certain things that we can measure and say we're hitting our technology benchmarks or not. And there's kind of data that we can put behind that. And sometimes it's going to be survey data. But for safety, I think a huge feeling of we can hit lots of benchmarks. But if our parents don't think that we are doing things to keep their children safe, they're going to be reluctant to send their kids to school. And if our teachers don't feel safe coming to teach at school, and our students don't feel safe coming to school. So that feeling of safety is a very different thing than with technology. And so doing things that radically increase the perception and the feeling of safety is delivering results in a different way than I would say with technology.
That's interesting. I think there's always been a tension between perception and reality, but the reality is that an individual's perception is their reality. And so you have to deal with that and address that. That's part of, like you said, change management is change management. And I think that that's true. But I'm glad that you said that, though, because the weight of perception when you're talking about safety is much more tangible or palpable.
People feel it.
Yeah, you really do. And just Maslow's hierarchy, like, your feelings and perceptions of safety and security impact everything above it on the pyramid. And how you feel and use technology, it's higher up on that pyramid than your feeling of safety and security. It's valuable observation. I'm glad you kind of went down that path. That's great.
Lane, now, like technology, there are systems to be bought and put into place, and technologies that are purchased, and they have a shelf life. They don't last forever. I tell people all the time, when back in the day when we'd go 1-to-1 and everybody got a Chromebook, I tell the administrators, they're like patting themselves on the back, and I'm like, oh, we don't get to spike the football and do the touchdown dance. We got to buy more Chromebooks next year. It never ends. We never get to that goal lines. So what's your approach to lifecycle management for physical security?
I think it is certainly something that I think about as we're installing these new systems. And in some ways, I think there's a life cycle management to our procedures in a way that I wouldn't say that there is on the technology side, because I talked about kind of our evolving pieces that we're always looking to kind of layer in. And we have the goal of what we're trying to get to, but we're evolving those pieces as well, kind of consciously and thoughtfully in those pieces. I think some of the safety and security have incredibly long lifespans. So if we're talking about installing a new gate, that's going to be a 15-year sort of thing. And there's very few technology pieces where I'm going to be talking about a 15-year lifespan for anything along those lines. And so that much longer time horizon is a real kind of gift in terms of some of the pieces, but is a challenge in working with our finance department in making sure then that we're ready for that life cycle as we add these improvements, because it is such a long time horizon and sometimes it is such a large price tag. And so having those two together and making sure that we're going to be ready, and quite possibly neither of us who are doing this now are going to be with the school when those things come up for actual replacement. So how do we have those be ready to kind of outlive us in these expenditures, not get lost, is something that is certainly on our mind as we have been increasing the amount of investments that we've been making with in the safety and security realm.
Little follow up to that, though, too. So there's physical things like barriers, gates, those kinds of things, but there's also some technical stuff. And that world is evolving pretty rapidly, right? Like you have your cameras, and the cameras may last for a fixed period of time, but the software that you run on that camera is changing. And how does it interface with your unified communication phone system? And you may have purchased that before you bought the camera, so you didn't think of that interaction. And now it's time to redo your phone system. And now you can tie your phone system to the camera system and the door access control system. What does that look like?
I think this is where I'm really fortunate to be wearing both hats, because that idea of systems integration is something that I've been doing as a technologist. And so being able to bring those skills and that lens to my safety work, I think is a real leg up that I have in the work that I'm doing there. And so as we talk about that, I'm constantly looking for ways to tie our systems together, just because I think it makes for a better experience and it makes it easier to do the upkeep. And so that is part of how we're budgeting. And as we're doing plans, that we do put into our plans that, okay, we're going to install these two systems, and then we're going to install the bridge between them, maybe a separate investment that may come out in a different fiscal year even, but having that be part of our plans. And I'll just briefly say on the camera piece, that's an interesting piece for me, because like there we're having discussions over where do we upgrade from 1080p to 4K in cameras. So even there, technology is going to make a difference, because there are places where changing from a 1080p to a 4K camera is suddenly going to give us a much better picture that we need, because we're able to zoom in on an area, for instance, that we may not be able to get a clear sense of right now. And so even thinking about that we're not always wanting to do like for like, even as we think about kind of the software pieces, and my cloud license is ending for some camera, we may be looking at changing kind of the physical hardware, even though the camera itself is still decent, or not even decent, but it's still more than adequate for what we're using in some places.
Yeah. Well, you've done a great job of actually kind of bringing us full circle from the beginning, which is sort of what's the value of combining these sorts of roles. And I think that Bob and I, in our work in with other schools, we see a lot of places where there really is a silo between those. And so those opportunities to integrate and pull together just don't happen, because the people who are responsible for the decisions just don't understand how they work together, or they're just not involved in the decision. So this is great. And I think that these evolving positions in technology, whether they be on the more academic side or the facility side or the operation side or the security side, is really something that a lot of our listeners are dealing with in their own jobs. And so, Lane, it was great to have you again and talk about another aspect of your job that I think is really valuable to our audience. So thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. It was such a pleasure to talk to both of you, as always.
Well, that was fun having Lane back. I'm glad he came.
One of the things that struck me that when we brought the two together was he talked about switching from 1080p to 4K, and you'd be able to see these different views better or whatever. And I thought, you got to talk to the network guy, because it's going to impact the network. That 4K flows a lot more bandwidth. And I thought, wait, Lane is the network guy. He's got it. But that's the whole point, right? And bringing it together.
Well, and one of the challenges that I think we hear a lot of schools talk about is, when does technology sort of get a seat at the table, right? So about half of the tech directors that I talk to report to the superintendent or head of school or whatever, and are part of the sort of leadership cabinet. And about half report to somebody on the leadership cabinet and are not there. And I think a lot of those schools for whom technology is not on the cabinet or at the leadership table, that's when IT gets brought in sort of too late. And decisions get made, or they go down paths to say, yeah, well, we need this. But nobody thinks about the bandwidth, or nobody thinks about the obsolescence, or nobody thinks about how it is going to impact other aspects of the technology or operations budget. And I think having somebody like Lane, who's in charge of operations and technology, who's at that table, is going to be able to identify those things kind of earlier. And I think that ultimately saves schools money and allows more to be put directly towards instruction.
It pains me to say, Alex, but of course you're correct in that. And it's not just the instruction that gains from that, but it's the security. Every dollar saved is a dollar that can be put towards security, physical, cyber, or instruction. There's always a place for that money that's saved to be placed, to be used. And I think with people like Lane in the role he is in, it really benefits Phillips Brooks and the other schools that are starting to follow that model.
Yeah. The other great part about having Lane back is that we've already asked him who his favorite teacher is, which is how we usually end our episodes. So if you listen to this one and you haven't listened to the previous episode where we had him on, go back and find that one. And since he didn't answer that, I'm just going to count that as a win for me, Bob, on our ongoing wager.
Of course you would, because that would be the first one. Let's count it as not a loss for you, Alex.
It's like right third. It's like right third.
Count it as not a loss.
All right. Until next time, and maybe we'll even get some different people on the show. Until our next episode, thanks for joining us today.
Learning Through Technology, a K-12 EdTech podcast, is brought to you by STS Education, a Pacific OneSource company. To learn more about how educators can leverage technology to drive successful educational outcomes, check us out at www.stsed.com. Connect with us by searching for Learning Through Technology in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, or anywhere else podcasts are found. And click subscribe so you don't miss an episode. On behalf of the team at STS Education, thanks for joining us.